High up in the jagged, ice-choked peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, a scream shatters the howling wind. It is not the cry of a mortal man, for no mortal could survive this freezing, oxygen-starved altitude, nor could any mortal endure the sheer, unfathomable agony being inflicted upon this prisoner. Chained to the unforgiving stone, with fetters forged by the god of fire himself, hangs a being of immense primordial power. Every day, a monstrous eagle descends from the heavens, its massive wings blotting out the sun, its razor-sharp talons tearing into immortal flesh to devour the prisoner's liver. Every night, the eagle departs, and the torn flesh knits itself back together, the organs regenerating in the freezing dark, only for the gruesome torment to begin all over again at the break of dawn. This blood-soaked cycle is the price of defiance. This is the ultimate cost of loving humanity. But if you were to ask this chained prisoner if the agony was worth it, he would lift his heavy head, look down past the clouds to the earth below, and watch the thousands of tiny, flickering lights pushing back the absolute darkness of night. He would see the hearths, the forges, the campfires, and the warmth of civilization itself, and he would not change a single thing. For he is Prometheus, the visionary, the rebel, the titan who stole fire from the gods. To understand the magnitude of his sacrifice, we must look back to a time before humanity, before the hearth, before the world as we know it even existed. Long before Zeus sat upon his golden throne on Mount Olympus, the cosmos was ruled by the Titans, a race of towering elemental beings led by the tyrant Cronus. The universe was a place of raw, untamed chaos, where the earth and sky were locked in a constant, suffocating embrace. When Zeus and his siblings finally rose up to overthrow their father Cronus, it triggered the Titanomachy, a cataclysmic war that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality apart. Mountains were hurled like pebbles, the oceans boiled, and the skies rained fire for 10 long, devastating years. During this apocalyptic conflict, the Titans relied on their massive size and brute strength, confident that their ancient power could crush the younger, upstart gods. But Prometheus was different. His very name means foresight. He possessed an intellect so vast, so piercing, that he could look down the corridors of time and see the inevitable outcome of the war. He knew that the age of the Titans was coming to an end, and that the sheer, unbridled force of his kin would ultimately fall to the cunning and organization of the Olympians. Driven by this profound vision of the future, Prometheus made a choice that many of his brethren viewed as the ultimate betrayal. He, along with his brother Epimetheus, whose name means hindsight, abandoned the Titans and allied themselves with Zeus. Prometheus became an invaluable strategist for the Olympians, his brilliant mind guiding them through the darkest days of the war. When the dust finally settled, the old regime was shattered. The defeated Titans were cast down into the abyssal depths of Tartarus, imprisoned in eternal darkness. But Prometheus and Epimetheus were spared. They were honored, given a place in the new world order, and tasked with a monumental responsibility by the victorious king of the gods. Zeus looked upon the earth, which had been scorched and scarred by a decade of cosmic warfare, and found it barren. He commanded the 2 Titan brothers to populate this newly stabilized world, to bring forth life from the lifeless dirt, and to bestow upon these new creatures the gifts and traits they would need to survive. Epimetheus, eager and impulsive, begged his brother to let him distribute the gifts of the gods among the animals. Prometheus, perhaps amused by his brother's enthusiasm, agreed, choosing to step back and observe. Epimetheus went to work with reckless joy. To the lion, he gave magnificent courage and flesh-tearing claws. To the eagle, he gave broad wings and piercing vision to dominate the skies. To the turtle, he gave a heavy, impenetrable shell. To the horse, he gave breathtaking speed. He handed out thick fur to ward off the winter cold, venom to protect the small and fragile, and gills to those who would dwell in the deep. But Prometheus, true to his name of hindsight, did not plan ahead. He gave away all the divine gifts, emptying the celestial reserves until there was absolutely nothing left. It was only then that Prometheus stepped forward to inspect his brother's work. The animal kingdom was magnificent, perfectly adapted, and fiercely capable. But there was one creature left unformed, one vessel still waiting to be crafted. Prometheus descended to the earth, walking among the perfectly designed beasts, and knelt by the edge of a river. He gathered the wet, heavy clay of the earth, mixing it with the sweet water of the river, and began to mold a new shape. He did not shape this creature to walk on all fours, looking down at the dirt like the beasts of the field. Instead, he molded it to stand upright, its eyes facing forward, its head lifted toward the heavens and the stars. He shaped it in the very image of the immortal gods themselves. But when the first humans drew breath and opened their eyes, the tragic reality of Prometheus's lack of foresight became agonizingly clear. Humanity was completely defenseless. They had no thick fur to protect them from the biting frost. They had no sharp claws to fight off the prowling predators. They had no wings to flee from danger, and no tough hides to shield them from the elements. They were naked, shivering, and pitifully weak. Prometheus looked upon his creations, and his heart broke. He felt a profound, overwhelming surge of pity and love for these fragile beings. They were his children, molded by his own hands, breathing the air of a world that was entirely hostile to their existence. While the other gods looked down from Mount Olympus with indifference or even disdain, viewing humans as nothing more than temporary playthings or future servants, Prometheus saw their potential. He saw the spark of intelligence behind their terrified eyes. He knew that if they were just given a chance, if they just had the tools to survive, they could achieve greatness. But the gods of Olympus were not known for their generosity. Zeus, newly established as the supreme ruler of the cosmos, demanded that this new, fragile race of mortals show proper respect and submission to their divine masters. He decreed that humanity must offer sacrifices to the gods, a tribute of their food to acknowledge their subservience. A great gathering was called at Macon to determine exactly how these sacrifices would be divided between gods and mortals. The outcome of this meeting would set the precedent for all time, dictating what portion of the hunt humanity could keep to nourish themselves and what portion must be burned on the altars of Olympus. Prometheus knew that humanity was already starving, barely clinging to survival in a harsh and unforgiving world. If they were forced to give up the best meat from their hunts to the gods, who did not even need mortal food to survive, humanity would surely perish. The Titan of foresight realized he had to intervene. He had to level the playing field, even if it meant crossing the most powerful being in the universe. An enormous ox was slaughtered for the arbitration. Prometheus, using his unmatched cunning, butchered the beast and divided it into two distinct piles. In the first pile, he took the rich, succulent meat, the nourishing organs, and the marrow-filled bones, and he hid them inside the animal's grotesque, unappetizing stomach. It looked like a pile of worthless offal. In the second pile, he gathered all the bare, scraped, inedible bones, but he wrapped them meticulously in thick, glistening, mouth-watering layers of white animal fat. It looked like the most delicious, decadent portion of the beast. Prometheus then invited Zeus to choose which pile would be the eternal portion dedicated to the gods. Zeus, drawn by the rich appearance of the glistening fat, and perhaps blinded by his own arrogance, reached out and claimed the second pile. But as the king of the gods pulled back the layer of fat, his hands met only hard, dry, worthless bone. He looked over at the other pile, realizing that the repulsive exterior hid the true sustenance. The silence that fell over Mycone was deafening. The air crackled with the sudden, terrifying build-up of divine electricity. Zeus's eyes darkened like a gathering storm. He had been tricked. The supreme ruler of the cosmos, the conqueror of the Titans, had been made a fool of by his own ally, all for the sake of these pathetic, crawling mortals. Zeus could not go back on his choice. The precedent was set. From that day on, humans would burn bones and fat to the gods, keeping the nourishing meat for themselves. But Zeus's wrath was absolute, and his vengeance was swift. If humanity wanted to eat raw meat like beasts, then they would live like beasts. "Let them eat their meat raw," Zeus thundered, his voice shaking the foundations of the earth. "For I shall withhold the gift of fire." With a single, devastating decree, Zeus stripped fire from the mortal realm. Every hearth went cold, every spark was extinguished. The world of men was plunged into an eternal, shivering darkness. The consequences were immediate and horrific. Without fire, the nights became a time of absolute terror. Humans huddled together in damp caves, their teeth chattering as the freezing winds howled outside. They could not cook the meat they had won the right to keep, forcing them to tear at raw flesh just to survive. Without the light of the flames, they were blind in the dark, easy prey for the massive, terrifying beasts that roamed the primordial forests. Without the heat of the forge, they could not shape metal, could not build tools, could not advance beyond the state of terrified animals. They were dying. The grand experiment of humanity was freezing to death in the mud. Prometheus watched from afar, his soul tormented by the cries of his creations. He had tried to help them, and in doing so, he had brought about their doom. The foresight that was his namesake showed him two distinct paths. He could look away, maintain his high status among the gods, and watch humanity fade into the frozen earth, becoming nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the history of the cosmos. Or he could act. He could cross the line of no return. He could commit the ultimate cosmic crime, knowing full well the terrifying punishment that would await him. For Prometheus, there was no real choice. The love he bore for his fragile, clay-born children was greater than his fear of the thunderbolt. He waited for the darkest part of the night, when the gods of Olympus were deep in their golden cups and divine slumber. Cloaked in shadow, the Titan slipped away from the earth and began the arduous, forbidden ascent toward the heavens. He carried with him a single, seemingly insignificant object, the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant. The exact source of the fire he sought varies in the whispered legends of the ancients. Some say he crept into the great forge of Hephaestus, moving silently past the sleeping Cyclops to steal a glowing ember from the god of metallurgy himself. Others claim he climbed higher still, waiting for the exact moment the sun god Helios began his journey across the sky, reaching out to catch a single, brilliant spark from the axle of the blazing sun chariot. Whichever path he took, the moment of theft was a moment that changed the universe forever. Prometheus captured the divine spark, the pure, unadulterated essence of celestial fire, and dropped it into the hollow, pithy center of the fennel stalk. The pith smoldered, keeping the spark alive without burning the outer shell. Concealing the stolen treasure beneath his cloak, Prometheus descended from the heavens. He moved with desperate speed, knowing that if he were caught, the spark would be extinguished forever. He raced down the slopes of Olympus, across the valleys, and into the dark, freezing caves where humanity lay huddled in despair. He gathered a pile of dry leaves and twigs. With gentle, trembling hands, he broke open the fennel stalk and coaxed the glowing ember out into the open. He blew on it softly, his divine breath feeding the tiny, fragile star. The ember glowed brighter, turning from deep red to brilliant orange. A wisp of smoke curled into the air, and then, with a sudden, beautiful crackle, the first flame leaped to life. The light pushed back the shadows of the cave. The humans, terrified at first by this dancing, biting spirit, backed away. But then they felt it, the warmth, the glorious, life-saving heat washing over their frozen skin. They crept closer, their eyes wide with wonder, reflecting the golden light of the flames. Prometheus did not just give them fire and leave. He stayed. He taught them how to feed the flame, how to bank it so it would survive the night, and how to use it to conquer their world. He showed them how to roast their meat, turning it from tough, raw flesh into nourishing food that fueled their bodies and minds. He taught them how to harden the points of wooden spears in the embers, giving them weapons to drive back the wolves and the lions. But the gift of fire was far more than just heat and light. Fire was the spark of civilization itself. With fire, Prometheus taught humanity the art of metallurgy, how to melt copper and tin to forge bronze, how to craft plows to till the earth, and swords to defend their homes. He taught them numbers and letters, the movements of the stars, the art of medicine, and the building of ships to conquer the oceans. Before fire, humans were beasts shivering in the dark. With fire, they became masters of the earth. Prometheus had given them the power of the gods, and that was exactly what Zeus had feared. When the king of the gods looked down from his high balcony on Mount Olympus, expecting to see the frozen corpses of the mortal race, he saw instead a world transformed. The earth was dotted with thousands of glowing points of light. Smoke rose from chimneys, the rhythmic ringing of hammers on anvils echoed through the valleys, and the smell of roasting meat drifted up to the heavens. Humanity was not dying, they were thriving, they were building, they were becoming powerful. The wrath of Zeus was unlike anything the universe had seen since the war with the Titans. The sky turned black, lightning shattered the clouds, and the thunder rolled so violently that the very foundations of Olympus shook. He knew immediately who was responsible. Only one being possessed the cunning, the audacity, and the love for humanity required to commit such a staggering act of treason. Zeus summoned his forces. There would be no trial, no debate, no mercy. He first devised a punishment for humanity, a subtle, beautiful, and devastating trap known as Pandora, carrying a jar filled with all the miseries, diseases, and sorrows of the world, ensuring that humans would pay for their stolen fire with a life of hardship and toil. But for Prometheus, the architect of this grand rebellion, Zeus reserved a punishment so cruel, so physically and psychologically agonizing, that it would echo through eternity as the ultimate warning to any who dared defy the throne of heaven. Zeus commanded Hephaestus, the god of the forge, to craft chains of unbreakable adamantine, a metal so dense and powerful that not even a titan could shatter it. He then ordered his two most brutal enforcers, Kratos, the personification of raw power, and Bia, the embodiment of violent force, to drag Prometheus to the very edge of the known world. They took him to the desolate, freezing peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, a place of sheer cliffs, howling blizzards, and absolute isolation. Hephaestus, who respected Prometheus and his brilliant mind, was hesitant. He wept as he raised his massive hammer, reluctant to bind his fellow immortal to such a grim fate. But Kratos mocked him, demanding that the will of Zeus be executed without hesitation. With heavy, ringing blows that echoed across the empty valleys, Hephaestus drove massive spikes of adamantine through the wrists and ankles of Prometheus, pinning him spread-eagled against the sheer rock face. The chains were wrapped around his chest, biting into his flesh, locking him in a posture of total vulnerability. When the grim work was done, the gods departed, leaving Prometheus alone in the freezing, thin air. But the chains were only the beginning. The true horror of Zeus's punishment was yet to arrive. From the dark clouds above, a shadow fell over the bound Titan. It was the Caucasian eagle, a monstrous, terrifying creature born of the primordial monsters Typhon and Echidna. This was no ordinary bird. It was a beast of nightmare proportions, its wingspan wider than a ship, its talons like iron scythes, its beak designed to tear through immortal flesh. The eagle landed upon Prometheus with a deafening screech. It did not go for his eyes or his throat. It knew its divine purpose. With a brutal, tearing strike, the eagle plunged its beak into the Titan's abdomen, ripping through muscle and sinew to reach the liver. The pain was beyond mortal comprehension. Prometheus screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that was swallowed by the uncaring wind. The eagle fed, tearing chunk after chunk of the dark, rich organ, while Prometheus, bound and helpless, was forced to endure every agonizing second of the butchery. Because he was immortal, he could not pass out, he could not die. He had to feel everything. When the eagle was finally gorged, it took flight, leaving Prometheus a hollowed, bleeding ruin hanging upon the rock. As the sun set and the freezing night took hold, the true cruelty of the curse revealed itself. The immortal flesh began to knit together, the torn muscles fused, the skin crawled back over the wound, and the liver, the organ of regeneration, grew back entirely. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Prometheus was whole again. And then the shadow fell across the rock once more. The eagle returned. Day after day, year after year, century after bleeding century, the cycle continued. The anticipation of the eagle's arrival, the excruciating pain of the feeding, the cold, agonizing itch of the nightly regeneration. It was a torture designed to break the mind as much as the body. Zeus wanted Prometheus to beg. He wanted the Titan to cry out for mercy, to apologize for loving humanity, to admit that the king of the gods was right. But Prometheus never broke. Through the haze of unimaginable pain, his mind remained as sharp as the fire he had stolen. He possessed a secret, a piece of foresight so dangerous that it terrified even Zeus. Prometheus knew the identity of the woman who was destined to bear a son greater than his father. If Zeus were to mate with this woman, the resulting child would overthrow him, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger of the gods, to the bloody peak of the Caucasus. Hermes offered Prometheus a deal. Reveal the name of the woman, and the chains would be broken. The torture would end. He could return to Olympus in glory. Prometheus, covered in his own dried blood, his eyes burning with an unbreakable will, looked at the messenger god and laughed. He spat his defiance into the face of Olympus. He would rather hang on this rock until the end of time than bow to a tyrant. He would keep his secret. He would endure the eagle. His spirit was harder than the adamantine chains that bound him, stronger than the mountain at his back. And so the centuries dragged on. Empires of men rose and fell. Humanity used the gift of fire to build great cities, to forge mighty empires, to write poetry, and to study the stars. They told stories around their hearths, passing down the legend of the great Titan who was suffering in the dark, so that they could live in the light. Thousands of years passed, the world changed, and eventually a hero was born into the mortal realm. A man of unparalleled strength, driven by a sense of justice and carrying a massive bow. His name was Heracles, the greatest of all Greek heroes, and ironically, a son of Zeus himself. During his legendary travels, Heracles found himself wandering into the desolate, freezing peaks of the Caucasus. He heard the cries on the wind. He climbed the treacherous cliffs until he found the source of the agony. Heracles stood in awe of the chained Titan, and as he watched, the sky darkened. The massive Caucasian eagle descended for its daily feast. But this time, the cycle of torment would be broken. Heracles knocked an arrow to his bow, drew back the string with his godlike strength, and let it fly. The arrow struck true, piercing the monstrous bird and sending it tumbling down into the abyssal valleys below, dead. Heracles climbed the rock, and with mighty blows from his club, shattered the unbreakable chains of Hephaestus. Prometheus fell forward, caught by the mortal hero. For the first time in millennia, the Titan was free. Zeus, watching from Olympus, did not strike them down with thunderbolts. The time of his absolute insecure tyranny had passed. He allowed the liberation partly because it brought immense glory to his son Heracles, and partly because Prometheus finally agreed to reveal his secret, warning Zeus away from the sea nymph Thetis, who would go on to bear Achilles instead. But Zeus's decrees could not be entirely undone. He had sworn upon the river Styx that Prometheus would remain bound to the rock forever. To satisfy this unbreakable cosmic law, without returning the Titan to his torment, a compromise was struck. A single link of the adamantine chain was forged into a ring, and into the setting of the ring, a small piece of the stone from the Caucasus mountain was placed. Prometheus wore this ring upon his finger for the rest of eternity. Technically, he was still bound to the rock, and the chain still held him. Prometheus returned to the world, a scarred but triumphant figure. He had faced the absolute wrath of the heavens, endured an eternity of agonizing torture, and emerged victorious. He had bet everything on humanity, and looking down at the world, seeing the brilliant, burning tapestry of human achievement, he knew he had won. The story of Prometheus is not just a myth about how we learn to cook our food or forge our metals. It is the ultimate story of rebellion against tyranny. It is the story of the uncompromising pursuit of progress, the belief that knowledge and enlightenment should not be hoarded by the powerful, but shared with all. Every time we strike a match, every time an engine turns, every time we push the boundaries of science, art, and understanding, we are fanning the flames of that original, stolen spark. We are the children of the Titan's foresight, and as long as the fire of human curiosity continues to burn, pushing back the darkness of ignorance, the legacy of Prometheus, the chained god who loved us enough to suffer for our light, will never, ever be extinguished.